Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. I'd like to talk in this episode about what the White House and Trump are terming chain migration and the fact that he is now saying that chain migration needs to end. First of all, chain migration is not an immigration legal term found anywhere in the Immigration Nationality Act. It is not found in the immigration manuals, the case law. It is really just a term that he, the president, essentially has made up. And so I want to discuss what it is that he's referring to chain migration and why it is incredibly unlikely to pass Congress in order to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act. What he is referring to as chain migration is family immigration. Okay. There's all kinds of different areas of immigration law, but the two primary ways of coming into the U.S. are through family and through employment. And within each of those categories, there are multiple subcategories. So the president would have you believe that with chain migration, that at least as he's terming it, that somebody comes into the United States and they can petition, their grandmother and their aunt and their second cousin and their third cousin twice removed from their half brother. It doesn't work like that. Okay, I'm going to explain in a minute how family immigration does work, but then he would also have you believe that because there's chain migration, that there are no security checks that are being done, that when one person comes in, the whole extended family of 200 people come in with no background checks, no security, no measures, and that it is a national security risk. So that's not farther from the truth. Okay. Um, no matter how somebody comes into the U.S., whether it is through chain migration or family immigration, whether it's through employment immigration, whether it's through the diversity lottery, asylum, all the different manners in which somebody can come into the US, they always have a background check and they always have to be determined if they are inadmissible. And there are multiple grounds of inadmissibility. I mean, I've done probably of the 800 some videos I've done, there's probably 50 of them just on grounds of inadmissibility. And if the person's inadmissible, then they may or may not qualify for a waiver. But it does not matter what relation the person is to anybody who's coming in the U.S. If that person does not pass the background check and is inadmissible, then that person doesn't come in unless a waiver is granted or unless some other manner of admissibility is shown. So, security or national security is not a real issue. Okay. If it were a real issue, then that means that everybody who comes into the United States is a security risk and that all immigration should stop. And obviously, that's not the case. So, this is a nitpicking by the president and an attempt to try to scare people thinking that this chain migration is a security risk. Now, the next problem is that Mr. Trump wants to make it so that only educated people who can come in under the employment based preferences are allowed to come in. There's a major problem with this because what this is saying is that let's say, I mean, honestly, it only takes a couple examples to see why that would never work. Let's say that a person immigrates into the United States, and let's say that person's very educated, but that let's say also that person's been married for 22 years and has a wife who stays home with the kids, who does not work. In that case, under Mr. Trump's plan, that wife, his spouse, the person who takes care of his kids and stays home with his kids, would not be allowed to come into the United States because she does not work, because she has elected either to not go to school or to stay home with the kids. It would break the immediate family apart. Then let's say that we're talking about the kids, and the kids are able to come in. Is Mr. Trump saying with chain migration that no longer should children be allowed to come into the United States? And if that's not the case, if the spouse is uneducated, does that mean that now they would have to decide among whether to leave the kids outside the United States with the spouse who's uneducated and taking care of them versus coming into the United States? So by ending what is termed chain migration, Mr. Trump is essentially stating that these families, or the result of it, would be families will be broken up. The entire family based immigration would basically deteriorate, so that people who would have come here, who would have made a life, contributed economically to society, will decide not to because they don't want to be away from their immediate family. They don't want to be separated. I mean, think about it. Think about it in your own lives. Would you want to move to another country knowing that your rest of your family could not move with you, that they would have to stay in their own country? There's actually several Supreme Court cases that have stated it is of primary importance that the family stay as a unit, that it takes precedence over many of the other elements of immigration. So even if by some chance there is some executive order that tries to end chain migration, which this cannot be through executive order because it's encoded statutorily in the Immigration and Nationality Act. But even if that were the case, this would go straight up to the Supreme Court, because it would be tearing families apart. So the basic thrust of family immigration is that there are four preferences. Okay, um, preferences 1, 3, and 4 deal with U.S. citizens petitioning somebody. Okay, so preference 1 is a U.S. citizen petitioning a son or daughter over 21 who is single. Preference 3 deals with a U.S. citizen petitioning a son or daughter who's married. And preference 4 deals with a U.S. citizen petitioning his brother or sister. Preference 2 is divided into two areas, 2A and 2B. This deals with lawful permanent residents who are petitioning their either spouse or children. So the first preference, 2A, is a lawful permanent resident petitioning his or her spouse, and then 2B is a lawful permanent resident petitioning his or her unmarried children under 21. There you go. That is the entire encapsulation of chain migration. That is the law of the preferences of everybody who is permitted to come into the United States based on a family relationship and based on when the petition was filed and so forth. So I know I've just touched on this, but just to give a little legal analysis to what would happen if the family immigration disappeared and was no longer available under U.S. immigration law. And by the way, if you look at the history, I mean, it has been probably more than 100 years since there has not been family immigration. That is how important family immigration is to come to the United States. Okay, if you like the video, click like, subscribe, and more on the coming videos. Thank you.